The wind cut across the empty rural road like a sharp breath, carrying dust, bits of dry leaves, and the faint echo of distant cars speeding far away. The sun was lowering behind a stretch of tall pines, throwing long orange shadows across the cracked asphalt. And right there, at the edge where the pavement met a shallow ditch, an elderly woman stood tied to a wooden post with her wrists pulled together in front of her chest. Her gray hair was messy and stuck to her face, her breathing uneven, and her tired eyes stayed fixed on the horizon as if trying to understand how her life had reached this moment. Her name was Margaret Holloway. She was 74 years old, and she had just watched her only daughter drive away in a white wedding car, leaving nothing behind but dust and the faint smell of perfume from the bridal bouquet that had fallen from the door. The ribbon from that bouquet lay by Margaret's feet, dirty and fluttering whenever the wind picked up. It tapped against her shoe over and over, almost like it was trying to remind her that what just happened was real. "Emily," she whispered, her voice cracked and thin. "Sweetheart, please, come back." But no one heard. There was no music now, no laughter, no guests, no celebration. Just the quiet road, the fading sunset, and a 74-year-old mother tied to a post, trying to breathe through the shock of what her daughter had done. Imagine if someone you love ended up like this. Imagine finding a parent, someone who raised you, protected you, left alone in a place where no one was supposed to be at that hour. What would you do if this happened to someone in your family? Margaret pulled gently against the rope, but the fibers dug deeper into her skin. Whoever tied her hadn't done it gently. It was rushed, tight, careless. A tear ran down her cheek. She wasn't someone who cried loudly or begged for attention. She had lived her whole life quietly, enduring, praying, hoping. But this was a pain she didn't know how to understand. The sky darkened more, and the cold crept across the fields. She shivered as the evening wind threaded through her thin cardigan. She hadn't brought a coat. She never imagined she'd need one. Her daughter had invited her to the wedding. She thought she would be sitting at a decorated table, maybe dancing a little, maybe watching her daughter begin a new life. She never imagined she would end up tied to a post like something someone wanted to discard. A truck engine echoed in the distance. She lifted her head, hope sparking for a moment. Maybe someone would see her. Maybe someone would stop. But the sound faded again, swallowed by the long stretch of empty road. Her legs ached. She leaned against the post to stay upright. Her vision blurred. She closed her eyes for a second, catching her breath. "Lord, please, keep her safe," she whispered. "Even if she thinks I'm a burden. Even now, abandoned, freezing, humiliated." Margaret prayed for her daughter's safety before her own. Years later, a shocking truth would finally come to light. Something that would rewrite everything Emily believed about her mother. Everything Margaret had carried alone. Everything that led to this night. But Margaret didn't know any of that now. She only held pain, love, and hope. Before you judge Emily, before you decide she was heartless, stay with this story until the end. Nothing about this moment is as simple as it looks. And one day, you may face a choice that forces you to see someone you love in a way you never expected. A car sped by far away, its headlights barely visible. Margaret turned her head instinctively, but the car didn't stop. She tried again to loosen the rope, but her fingers were numb. Then she heard footsteps on the gravel behind her. Her breath caught. Her heart pounded. She turned her head as far as she could. A silhouette stood there, still, silent, watching. "Please," Margaret whispered. "Help me." But the figure didn't move, didn't answer, didn't come closer. Then, just as slowly, it stepped back into the trees and disappeared. Margaret shut her eyes. She didn't understand. Was it someone from the wedding? Someone who didn't want to be seen helping her? Someone ashamed? "Emily, why?" she whispered. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Time lost meaning. Then another sound reached her ears. A truck approaching from the opposite direction, its single working headlight flickering. It slowed more, then stopped. A door opened. "Ma'am, are you all right?" The voice was warm, solid, human. It was the voice that would save her life. This moment, this exact moment, marked the beginning of everything that would follow: the rebuilding of an elderly woman's dignity, the unraveling of a daughter's choices, and the revelation of a truth buried for years. But before we get there, stay with Margaret a little longer. Think about your own mother, grandmother, or someone who raised you. If you found them like this, what would you do? If this story touches your heart, stay with me to the end. It might change the way you see the people who loved you quietly your whole life. The man hurried toward her and reached for the rope. "Who did this to you?" he asked. Margaret opened her mouth to answer, but her knees buckled, and her world went dark. She wouldn't know it until years later, but the truth, the real truth about why her daughter abandoned her, would shatter everything they both believed. And it would all begin with a simple wooden box sitting quietly in Margaret's bedroom. When Margaret opened her eyes again, she was lying on a hospital bed under a soft white blanket. The room felt warm, almost too warm compared to the cold night she had just come from. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The bright lights, the soft beeping, the faint smell of disinfectant, it all felt distant, unreal. A nurse noticed her stirring and stepped closer. "Ma'am, you're safe. You're at Willow Creek Memorial." Margaret blinked slowly. How did I get here?" "A man found you on the road and brought you in," the nurse said gently. "You were very cold and dehydrated, but you're doing better now." Margaret tried to sit up, but a wave of weakness washed over her. "You can rest," the nurse added. "You're safe now." Safe. It had been hours since she had felt anything close to that. The door creaked open, and the man from the road stepped inside. He looked nervous, like he wasn't sure he belonged in the room. He removed his cap and held it in both hands. "Ma'am, I'm the one who found you. My name's Hank." Margaret gave him a small, shaky nod. "Thank you. You saved my life." Hank shook his head. Anyone would have stopped. But she knew that wasn't true. Not everyone would have stopped. Some did see her and walked away into the trees. Some drove past. Some chose not to look closely. Kindness isn't something everyone chooses. "I'm glad it was you," she said softly. Hank cleared his throat. "I didn't want you waking up alone, so I stayed nearby." Those words brought tears to her eyes. After a night that showed her how cruel people could be, this small act of decency hit her harder than she expected. "You should get some rest," Hank said, stepping back toward the door. "I'll check on you tomorrow if that's all right." Margaret nodded. "I would like that." Over the next 2 days, the doctors monitored her vitals, changed her IV, brought warm meals, and made sure her wrists were healing. But they couldn't touch the part of her that hurt most, her heart. She told no one what happened. She didn't give names. She didn't mention her daughter. She didn't want to ruin Emily's new life or expose her choices. Margaret believed burdens were things she should carry quietly. When the hospital finally released her, Hank showed up with his truck, waiting just outside the entrance. "You didn't have to come," Margaret said. "I know," Hank replied, "but I wanted to make sure you got home safely." She smiled softly and climbed into the passenger seat. The ride was quiet but comfortable. They talked about simple things: the weather, grocery prices, how long he'd lived in town. Hank never pushed her, never asked for details she didn't want to share. When they reached her house, he carried her small hospital bag inside, set it gently on the kitchen table, and gave her a warm nod. "If you need anything," he said, "I'm just down County Road 7. "Thank you," Margaret whispered. After he left, the silence of her home pressed in on her. The familiar furniture, the photos on the wall, the soft ticking of the kitchen clock, everything looked the same, but she felt different. She walked to the shelf where her keepsake sat and picked up the ceramic bird. Its chipped wing rested against her finger. "I'm home," she whispered, though the house felt emptier than ever. Days passed slowly. Margaret returned to her routine, watering her marigolds, sweeping the porch, folding laundry, but her body moved like it belonged to someone else. Her mind replayed the wedding, the car ride, the rope, the cold, the silence. She didn't tell Linda what happened. She didn't want pity. Sometimes she woke in the middle of the night, her breath shaking, feeling the rope burning her skin again. She would sit up in bed and press her fingers to her locket, telling herself she was safe now. But she never said her daughter's name aloud. Not yet. Linda noticed the change. "Margaret," she said one morning, "you've lost weight, and you look pale again. What's going on?" "I'm just tired," Margaret said with a forced smile. "Work has been busy." But her eyes couldn't hide the truth. Still, she kept going. People like Margaret always keep going. They survive in quiet ways. Weeks passed, then months. She returned to work at the grocery store, where her co-workers greeted her with warm hugs and genuine smiles. "We missed you, Margaret. Are you feeling better? Let us know if you need help." Their kindness mattered more than they realized. One afternoon, a customer noticed the faded marks on her wrists. "Are you all right, ma'am?" he asked with concern. "Oh, just an old accident," she lied. "I'm fine." Hank visited sometimes, usually bringing a small treat from a diner. Peach muffins, blueberry scones, things she loved but rarely bought for herself. He never stayed too long, and he never brought up that night unless she did. "I'm healing," she told him once. "I can see that," he replied, and she was. Slowly, quietly. But something inside her stayed heavy, the part that wondered why her daughter had left her. The part that still loved Emily deeply enough to protect her, even from the truth. One evening, while dusting the shelves, Margaret noticed the walnut box again. She picked it up and ran her fingers along the smooth wood. Inside was the sealed letter Robert had left behind. She had never opened it, never wanted to invade something meant for someone else. But tonight, the box felt heavier than usual, as if it contained something waiting to be revealed. "I hope you're watching over her," Margaret whispered to the box. "She needs guidance." Little did she know the letter inside would soon change everything. Her daughter's beliefs, her memories, her entire understanding of who Margaret truly was. Meanwhile, far from Willow Creek, Emily's life was coming apart piece by piece. Her marriage was failing. Her confidence was fading. Her spirit felt bruised. And deep inside, guilt whispered louder each day. She didn't know the truth yet. She didn't know what her father wrote. She didn't know what her mother survived. But the time was coming. And when the truth surfaced, it would shatter everything she thought she knew. Emily had always believed that marriage would elevate her life. She imagined herself stepping into a world where confidence came naturally, where success followed her, where she finally belonged. But reality rarely matches fantasy, and the cracks in her perfect image grew deeper by the month. Derek became distant almost immediately after the wedding. His smiles faded, his attention shifted, his patience thinned. At first, she blamed herself for his moods. She tried harder, cooking elaborate meals, dressing the way he liked, attending events she didn't care about. She tried to fit the mold he and his mother expected her to fill. But no matter what she did, it was never enough. One night, she stood in front of the bathroom mirror, touching her tired face, noticing how her eyes lacked the spark they once had. There was a time she had looked like her mother, soft, warm, hopeful. Now she hardly recognized herself. "Maybe I'm not good enough," she whispered. But the truth was simpler. She was losing herself. It wasn't just Derek. It was everything surrounding him. His expectations, his pride, the unspoken rules of his world, and the silent pressure that made her feel like her mother was something to hide. Patricia reinforced that every chance she got. "You need to present yourself better," she would say. "You should socialize more. Make the right connections. You must focus on your image." Image. The same word she had heard over and over during the wedding planning. The same word that pushed her to leave her mother on a dark road. Emily buried that night in the deepest part of her mind, refusing to look at it. It was easier to pretend it hadn't happened, that her part in it was smaller than it was. But buried guilt doesn't die. It grows. As the months passed, the cracks grew wider. Bills showed up unexpectedly, large ones. Derek hid them, dismissing her questions. "Everything's fine," he said coldly. "Stop worrying." But she worried anyway. Then came the messages, texts from numbers she didn't recognize, Flirty comments, late-night calls, and Derek's dismissive excuses. You're imagining things. You're insecure. You're overreacting. But the truth was already obvious. Emily felt her world collapsing. She felt like a shadow in her own home, small and fading. She cried quietly at night, choking back sobs so the walls wouldn't hear. One evening, when Derek didn't come home until nearly sunrise, smelling of cigarettes and perfume that wasn't hers, she sat on the couch and stared at the front door, long after he walked past her, without a word. "This can't be my life," she whispered. But it was. And beneath that pain, beneath the shame and confusion, something else stirred. A memory she didn't want to face. A road. A rope. Her mother's trembling voice. She pressed her hands to her face. No, no, don't think about that. But she was beginning to. The turning point came when she overheard two co-workers discussing a story from a nearby county. "Did you hear about that elderly woman someone left tied up on a road after a wedding? That's sick. Who could do that?" Emily froze. Her breath vanished. Her stomach twisted painfully. She tried to speak casually, but her voice cracked. "Do they know who she was?" "No idea," one coworker said. "Police didn't release details." Emily nodded slowly and excused herself, but once she reached the bathroom, she collapsed to her knees. She had spent months pretending this night didn't matter, pretending it wasn't as bad as it was, pretending she was still a good person. But now the memory clawed its way to the surface. Her mother's face, the fear in her eyes, the sound of the car door closing, the rope. She felt like she couldn't breathe. "I have to see her," she whispered. "I have to go home." But going home meant facing the truth, facing what she did, facing the person she had become. Still, something inside her pushed harder than her fear. The same small, fragile part of her that used to run into her mother's arms when she was scared as a child. A few weeks later, she received a letter from the courthouse about a minor issue in Willow Creek regarding property paperwork. It was nothing urgent, nothing dramatic, but it was just enough to pull her back toward her roots, toward the place she had abandoned. The universe had a way of pushing people where they needed to go. Emily sat on her couch holding the envelope, feeling something shift inside her. The guilt that had been whispering for months now spoke clearly. Go see her. Go home. Go fix what you broke. She grabbed her keys and never looked back. The drive to Willow Creek felt longer than usual. Every mile carried the weight of regret. Every tree, every sign, every road reminded her of who she used to be and who she had become. When she finally pulled into her mother's driveway, her hands shook. She felt like a child again, lost, scared, ashamed. Then she saw her. Margaret was sitting on the porch watering her marigolds, moving carefully, gently, like someone who had learned to treat life with reverence. When she looked up and saw Emily standing there, she froze, not in fear, but in disbelief. "Emily," she whispered. Emily swallowed hard. "Hi, Mom." They stood there for a moment that felt like an entire lifetime. The past, the pain, the love, the guilt, all suspended in the quiet air between them. "You came," Margaret said softly. Emily nodded. "I needed to." Margaret set the watering can down slowly, as if any sudden movement might make her daughter disappear again. They walked toward each other, both hesitant, both fragile. When Emily stepped inside the house, everything smelled the same. Lavender, old wood, warm memories. It made her chest ache. "Sit wherever you like," Margaret said gently. They sat, awkward at first, both afraid to speak the wrong words. Then, slowly, they began to talk. And the healing, after all the damage, finally began. Emily didn't know how to begin, so she started with something small. "You kept everything the same," she said quietly, looking around the living room. "It feels like I never left." Margaret smiled gently. "Some things bring comfort when life gets too loud." Emily nodded, eyes roaming the shelves until they landed on the walnut box. She felt a strange pull toward it, something familiar, something forgotten, something unfinished. Margaret noticed her gaze. "There's something I want to show you," she said softly. "Something I think you're ready to see." Emily's breath caught as Margaret stood and walked slowly toward her bedroom. When she returned, she was holding the box in both hands, as if it carried the weight of their entire history. "I haven't opened this," Margaret whispered. "Your father left it for you." Emily stared at the box. Her throat tightened. "Dad? Left something for me?" "Yes," Margaret said, sitting beside her. "He sealed it before he passed. He said it should only be opened when the time was right." Emily felt her heartbeat in her ears. "Why now?" Margaret touched her daughter's hand. "Because you finally came home, sweetheart." Emily opened the box with trembling fingers. Inside were old letters, keepsakes her father had cherished, and one envelope with her name written in his handwriting. She picked it up slowly. "For Emily," the front read, "when you're old enough to understand who your mother truly is." Emily's breath shook. "Mom, did you read this?" "No," Margaret said gently. "It wasn't meant for me." Emily looked at her mother, then back at the envelope, feeling the weight of years pressing against her chest. "Do you want me to leave the room?" Margaret asked softly. "No," Emily whispered. "Please, stay." With careful fingers she opened the letter. The sound of the paper unfolding seemed louder than it should have been. She began reading, her voice trembling so much she could barely form the words. Her father's writing carried truths she never knew. He wrote about the years when he was too sick to work, about how Margaret had taken extra shifts to keep the house, about jewelry she sold quietly to pay for Emily's school fees, about meals she skipped so Emily and her father could eat, about sacrifices Emily never saw, sacrifices Margaret never mentioned. "She never complained," the letter said. "Everything you had came from her. Everything good in your life exists because she fought for it." Emily's tears fell onto the paper. She wiped them away quickly, wanting to keep reading even though every word shattered her. Her father wrote about pride and shame, fear and ambition, and the dangers of letting the world convince her that her mother was somehow less. "If you ever push her away," the letter warned, "you will lose the best part of yourself." Emily broke into sobs, deep, painful, unguarded. Margaret reached out instinctively. "It's all right, sweetheart." "No," Emily cried. "It's not. I treated you like you were nothing. I acted like you were someone to hide, someone I was ashamed of. I abandoned you, Mom. I abandoned you." Margaret's eyes filled with tears, but her voice stayed soft and steady. "You were lost. People lose their way sometimes. I left you on a road," Emily whispered, shaking violently. "I left you there. I don't even know why. I don't know how I became that person." Margaret cupped her daughter's cheek. "You're not that person anymore." Emily fell forward into her mother's arms, crying harder than she had since she was a child. Margaret held her tightly, rubbing slow circles on her back. "I forgive you," Margaret whispered into her hair. "You shouldn't," Emily sobbed. "You shouldn't forgive me." "But I do," Margaret said softly. "I'm your mother. My love doesn't disappear because of one terrible night." They stayed like that for a long time, just mother and daughter, hearts finally beating in the same rhythm again. When Emily calmed enough to speak, she whispered, "I want to make this right. I want to earn your forgiveness, not just receive it." Margaret smiled weakly. "Then let's take it one day at a time." But Emily wasn't finished. "Mom, I want to know everything that happened that night. Please, tell me." Margaret hesitated. The memory hurt. It always would. But Emily held her hand and said, "I need to face it. I need to understand the pain I caused." So Margaret told her, slowly, quietly, with careful words. She told her how Ben drove her down the dark road, how he tied her to the post, how she begged him to stop, how he apologized but did it anyway, how she stood there for hours, freezing, terrified, alone, how she prayed, mostly for Emily, not herself, how Hank stopped when others didn't, how she thought she might die. By the time Margaret finished, Emily was shaking. "I'm a monster," she whispered. Margaret took her daughter's hands firmly. "No, you made a terrible mistake." "But you are not a monster," Emily cried again, the guilt almost unbearable. "How can you not hate me?" Margaret brushed her thumb against her cheek. "Because love is stronger than pride, stronger than judgment, stronger than that night." Emily leaned forward, resting her forehead against her mother's. I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be someone worthy of you. Margaret smiled gently. You already are, sweetheart. That was the moment the healing began, not because the past had changed, but because Emily let herself finally see her mother clearly. Later that afternoon, Emily asked something that surprised even her. Mom, will you take me to meet the man who saved you? Margaret blinked. Hank? Yes, Emily said. I want to thank him. I need to look him in the eyes and tell him what I couldn't tell you that night. Margaret nodded. We can go tomorrow. And they did. The next day, under a soft gray sky, they drove slowly down County Road 7. When they reached Hank's driveway, he was working under the hood of an old truck. He wiped his hands on a rag when he saw them and walked over with a gentle smile. Margaret, he greeted warmly. Then he looked at Emily. And you must be her daughter. Emily's voice shook. Yes, and I owe you more than I can ever repay. Hank shook his head. You don't owe me anything, ma'am. Yes, I do, Emily insisted, tears forming. You saved my mother's life. I wasn't there. I should have been. And you stepped in when I failed. Hank studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. Well, what matters is you're here now. Emily wiped her eyes, deeply moved by the simplicity of his kindness. They talked for a while, about that night, about life, about forgiveness. Emily apologized again, this time to a stranger who had shown her mother more compassion in one night than she had shown in years. When they left, something in Emily felt lighter, not healed, not yet, but on the way. She still had much to make right, but she wasn't running anymore. After visiting Hank, something shifted in Emily. It wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was quiet, steady, like a door she had kept locked for years was finally beginning to open. For the first time since the wedding, she felt like she was breathing air that belonged to her. Real air, honest air. As the days passed, she spent more time with Margaret, not out of guilt anymore, but out of genuine love and a desire to rebuild the connection she had thrown away. They cooked together. They walked through the neighborhood. They visited the senior center, where Margaret introduced her to friends with a proud smile Emily hadn't seen in years. This is my daughter, Margaret would say softly. She's home for a while. And every time, Emily's heart swelled. People who knew Margaret, a cashier from the grocery store, a neighbor who always waved from her porch, a retired mechanic who lived 2 streets over, would pull Emily aside and say things like, Your mother has the kindest heart in this town. She always helps others, even when no one asks. You're lucky to have her. Emily would nod, feeling each word settle into her bones. I know, she would say. I really do. One morning, Emily woke early and stepped into the kitchen to find Margaret humming softly while making breakfast. The sun filtered through the curtains, warming the room in soft gold. It struck Emily how peaceful her mother looked. Let me help, Emily said. Margaret smiled. You can stir the eggs. They cooked together, moving in a gentle rhythm, like 2 people relearning a dance they once knew by heart. After breakfast, Emily washed the dishes while Margaret dried them, their shoulders brushing occasionally. When they finished, Emily turned to her mother. Mom, can I stay here for a little while? Not forever, just until I figure things out. Margaret didn't hesitate. Of course you can. This will always be your home. Emily felt tears gather in her eyes. Thank you. That afternoon she made a difficult phone call to her husband. Derek answered with irritation in his voice. Where are you? He demanded. I'm with my mother, she said calmly. For how long? I don't know. He scoffed. You're acting childish, Emily. Come home. No, she said quietly but firmly. I'm staying here for now. You're being ridiculous, he snapped. No, she said again. I'm finally doing what's right. Are you doing this because she manipulated you? He asked. Because she... Emily cut him off. Don't talk about my mother like that. There was a long pause. You'll regret this, he said finally. No, she said. I regret not coming home sooner. She hung up first. Her hands shook, but she felt freer than she had in years. It wasn't just leaving Derek, it was choosing herself choosing honesty, choosing love. That evening, while Margaret sat on the porch knitting, Emily walked to the old oak tree in the front yard. She remembered climbing it as a child, her mother cheering her on from below. She touched the rough bark and whispered, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." She didn't expect an answer, but something about the moment made her feel like the house itself forgave her. Later that week, Emily filed for divorce. She expected Derek to fight it, but he didn't. Maybe he didn't care anymore. Or maybe he had already moved on to someone else. It hurt, but it wasn't surprising. Margaret comforted her through the process. "You're strong," she said. "Stronger than you think." Emily spent her evenings reading old journals she had left behind, flipping through photo albums, rediscovering a childhood filled with love she had taken for granted. In one picture, she was 5 years old, holding the ceramic bird she had painted for her mother. "You kept all of these," she whispered. "Of course I did," Margaret said. "You were my joy." Emily traced her younger self with her fingertips. "How did I forget that? You were chasing something you thought you needed," Margaret replied. "Now you know what truly matters." Emily nodded slowly. "I do." One night, months after returning home, Emily found herself unable to sleep. She stepped outside and sat on the front steps, wrapped in a blanket. The air was cool, and the sky shimmered with stars. After a few minutes, she heard the door open behind her. Margaret stepped out and sat beside her. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. Emily shook her head. "Just thinking." "About what?" Emily sighed. "About how far I ran, and how far I had to fall to realize what I had." Margaret leaned her head gently against her daughter's shoulder. "Sometimes we learn through pain." Emily blinked back tears. "I don't ever want to hurt you again." "You won't," Margaret whispered. "You're here now." They sat together in silence, listening to crickets and the distant hum of the highway. Emily realized she had never felt more grounded in her entire life. The next morning, Emily asked, "Mom, would you like to go through Dad's things together? I want to know everything. All the stories I never let myself hear." Margaret smiled warmly. "I'd like that." They spent hours sorting through old boxes, photos, handwritten notes, trinkets from road trips, tools he once used. Emily listened as Margaret shared story after story, how her father proposed, how hard he worked even when he was sick, how much he adored his daughter. "He loved you so much," Margaret said, holding a picture of him carrying Emily on his shoulders. "More than anything." Emily stared at the photo, tears filling her eyes. "I miss him." "I do too," Margaret whispered. Going through those memories created something new between them. Not just forgiveness, but closeness, real closeness. Emily began helping Margaret with chores, fixing things around the house, organizing rooms that had been untouched for years. They cooked together almost every evening, trying new recipes, laughing when they burned something. Slowly the house regained its warmth. Slowly Emily regained her sense of belonging. Slowly Margaret regained her daughter. One Sunday morning, as they were preparing breakfast, Margaret suddenly paused and looked at Emily with a softness that made the room feel smaller. "You know," she said gently, "you don't have to rush to leave. You can stay as long as you want." Emily smiled. "I want to stay, at least until I'm ready." Margaret nodded. "Then stay." It was a simple conversation, but for both of them it meant everything. Weeks later, Emily finally allowed herself to ask the question she had been terrified to say aloud. "Mom, do you still love me?" Margaret reached across the table and took her hand. "Sweetheart, I never stopped," Emily cried, but they were easier tears this time, tears of healing, not guilt. That night, Emily wrote something in her journal for the first time in years. "I'm learning how to be a daughter again, and she's teaching me with grace I don't deserve." But Margaret would say differently. She would say Emily deserved love just as much as anyone else, and she believed it with all her heart. As spring slowly warmed the town, Emily found herself slipping into a peaceful routine she never imagined she would crave. Morning coffee with her mother on the porch, walks to the grocery store where everyone greeted Margaret with genuine warmth, evenings spent watching old shows, knitting or organizing recipes. But the biggest change wasn't in their routine. It was in the way Emily began to see her mother, clearly, fully, without the fog of shame or the pressure of people who had convinced her to hide where she came from. One day, while cleaning out the linen closet, Emily found a stack of letters tucked behind a pile of old blankets. They were addressed to her. Every birthday, every Christmas, every milestone she had missed, while chasing a life that wasn't hers. "Mom," she said softly, walking into the kitchen with the bundle in her hands. "Why didn't you ever send these?" Margaret looked at the letters, then at her daughter. "I didn't want to disturb you. You seemed, busy. I didn't want to make you feel obligated to write back." Emily felt her heart twist painfully. "I wasn't busy. I was running away." Margaret stepped closer and cupped Emily's cheek. "You were finding yourself. We all take different paths. But look what I did along the way," Emily whispered. Margaret pressed her forehead gently against her daughter's. "And look where you ended up, right here, with me." They spent the next hour reading through the letters, messages filled with love, updates about the garden, memories of Emily's childhood, prayers for her happiness, hopes for a future where they'd be closer again. Every word reminded Emily of the love she had pushed aside. Later that day, Emily went with Margaret to the senior center, where Margaret often volunteered. Watching her mother interact with people, helping serve meals, comforting those who were lonely, sharing warm conversation, Emily felt a new kind of admiration rise inside her. "How did I ever think you weren't enough?" Emily whispered to herself. Margaret turned, catching her daughter's gaze, and smiled warmly. "You all right, sweetheart?" Emily nodded. "I'm more than all right." That evening, Margaret showed Emily how to prepare the family's traditional pot roast, something Emily had always been too busy to learn. They cooked side by side, laughing when Emily added too much paprika. When they sat down to eat, Emily took a bite and closed her eyes. "This tastes like home." Margaret reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "That's because it is." But healing wasn't a straight line, and the world outside their little home didn't forget Emily's past. One afternoon, while Margaret was at work, Emily walked into the grocery store to surprise her with coffee. A few customers recognized her. "Hey, aren't you Margaret's daughter? She talks about you all the time. She's so proud of you." Emily felt warmth spread through her chest, but then she overheard something else. "Isn't she the girl who married that guy from Oak Ridge? I heard the marriage didn't last." "Well, people change." Emily froze for a moment, feeling old insecurities stir inside her. But then she saw Margaret at the end of the aisle, stocking shelves with a peaceful smile on her face. Margaret looked up, saw her daughter, and her eyes lit up instantly. It grounded Emily in a way nothing else could. She walked over and hugged her mother from behind. "I brought you something." Margaret turned, surprised. "You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to," Emily said. The customers watching softened, their judgments fading. People often form opinions with very little information, but kindness can dissolve ignorance faster than explanations ever could. That evening, as they sat on the porch, Emily suddenly said, "Mom, I want to tell you something important." Margaret looked at her gently. "What is it?" "I'm proud to be your daughter," Emily whispered. "I mean it. I want everyone to know it. I'm done hiding." Margaret's eyes filled with tears, and she reached for her daughter's hand. "You have no idea how long I've waited to hear that." Emily rested her head on her mother's shoulder, and for the first time in years, she felt truly whole. But life still had one more test waiting. A few days later, Emily received a call. Her divorce papers were finalized. There was no fight, no negotiation, no conversation. Derek simply signed them and moved on. Emily stood in the kitchen holding the letter, feeling the weight of an entire chapter closing. Margaret approached her gently. "How do you feel?" Emily took a long, slow breath, free. Sad, but free. Margaret wrapped her arms around her. "You deserve peace, sweetheart." "I want to rebuild my life," Emily said softly. "And I want you to be part of it. Every part." Margaret smiled through tears. "I'd like that." Emily returned to therapy, began looking for remote work, and found stability she didn't think she was capable of. Her confidence grew, not the shallow kind she chased before, but the grounded kind that comes from truth. One afternoon, While reorganizing the attic, Emily found a box labeled Emily's Childhood. Inside were old drawings, a few school projects, a small sweater her mother had knitted for her toddler years, and the original ceramic bird with a chipped wing. She held it delicately, remembering the pride she felt when she gave it to her mother. Margaret climbed the attic stairs slowly. "Find anything interesting?" Emily turned toward her, tears forming. "You kept it all this time." Margaret smiled. "Of course. It was the first thing you ever made for me." Emily held the ceramic bird against her chest. "Mom, can we fix it together?" Margaret's eyes softened. "I'd love that." So they fixed the wing, carefully, gently, the way they were mending their relationship. It dried under the warm kitchen light, looking whole again in a way that felt symbolic. That night, Emily placed the bird on a shelf right above the living room window, where sunlight hit it perfectly in the morning. "Now it can watch over us," she whispered. Margaret kissed her cheek. "It always did." But the story wasn't over yet. There was still the matter of revealing the full truth, of Emily learning about all the sacrifices Margaret had kept hidden and all the love she had quietly carried. And soon, something unexpected would push that truth into the open, a truth that had been waiting patiently for years. A few weeks later, while Margaret was at her shift at the grocery store, Emily received an unexpected visitor. It was Mrs. Abernathy, the neighbor who had lived across the street for more than 20 years. A small woman with a sharp voice but a very soft heart. Emily opened the door quickly. "Mrs. Abernathy, is everything all right?" "Oh, I'm fine," the older woman said, waving her hand. "But I've been watching you two these past months, and there's something I think you should know. Something your mother would never tell you herself." Emily stepped aside to let her in, feeling a nervous squeeze in her stomach. "Please, come in." Mrs. Abernathy sat on the couch and looked around with familiarity. "Your mom has lived in this house her whole life," she started. "Your father built half of it with his own hands. And when he got sick, she did everything she could to make sure you had a future." Emily nodded slowly. "I've been learning that. She never told me any of it." "She wouldn't," Mrs. Abernathy said. "Your mother doesn't brag. She doesn't complain. She just loves quietly." Emily swallowed. "What is it you wanted to tell me?" Mrs. Abernathy leaned forward, lowering her voice. "There was a year, right before you went to college, when your mother took on 3 jobs. 3, dear. She worked at the grocery store, sewed clothes for neighbors, and cleaned houses on weekends." Emily felt her breath catch. 3 jobs? "Yes," Mrs. Abernathy said, nodding. "And still they were struggling. The medical bills, the property taxes. Everything was piling up. I remember one night, she came to my door, so tired she could hardly stand, and she asked if I could watch you while she went to a late cleaning shift." Emily covered her mouth, shaking. "Why didn't she tell me?" "Because she didn't want you to worry," Mrs. Abernathy said. "She didn't want you to feel guilty. She believed in your future. She believed you deserved a chance, even if it meant she had to lose sleep." Emily wiped her tears. "I can't believe I didn't see any of it. I was right here. How was I so blind?" Mrs. Abernathy smiled gently. "Sweetheart, teenagers don't see everything happening behind the scenes. And your mother didn't let you. She made sure your world stayed bright, even when hers was falling apart." Emily nodded, tears streaming now. "And there's more," Mrs. Abernathy continued softly. "The night your father passed, your mother didn't have money for the funeral expenses. She was terrified, but she put on a brave face for you. She didn't want you to feel the weight of that loss." Emily felt her chest tighten painfully. "She never told me any of this. Not once." "I know," Mrs. Abernathy said, "but you should know. And there's something else. Something more recent." Emily looked up, eyes red. "What is it?" Mrs. Abernathy hesitated. "After your wedding, when you left town, your mother wasn't the same. She acted strong, but she was hurting. Not from the moment itself. I didn't know about that. But from losing you. She checked her phone every morning, hoping you'd call. She made your favorite meal sometimes just in case you walked through the door." Emily let out a broken sob. I hurt her so much." Mrs. Abernathy reached out and squeezed her hand. "But she never spoke badly of you, not once. She always said, 'She's just finding herself. She'll come back when she's ready.'" Emily buried her face in her hands. "She defended me, even when I abandoned her." "That's who your mother is," Mrs. Abernathy said softly. "A heart that forgives before it's asked to." Emily tried to steady her breathing. "Thank you for telling me. I needed to hear this. I really did." Mrs. Abernathy smiled warmly. "She loves you more than life itself, and I can see you're trying. That matters." When the older woman left, Emily sank onto the couch, her heart heavy but opening wider than ever before. She felt a surge of determination, not born of guilt now, but of love. A desire to honor her mother, to rebuild the bond they both deserved, to give back a fraction of the kindness Margaret had poured into her life. Later that afternoon, Emily waited for Margaret to return home. When her mother walked in, tired from work but smiling out of habit, Emily rushed forward and embraced her tightly. "Mom," she whispered, "I'm so proud of you. I want you to know that." Margaret froze slightly, startled by the intensity of the hug. "Sweetheart, where's this coming from?" Emily pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. "From truth, from everything I'm finally learning about you, about what you carried, about what you gave up for me." Margaret's eyes softened with a sadness that had lived there for years. "I didn't give up anything. You were worth every sacrifice." Emily rested her forehead on her mother's shoulder. "I want to take care of you now, the way you took care of me." Margaret ran her hand gently through her daughter's hair. "You already are." They stood there for a long time, letting the quiet wash over them like a healing balm. But the journey wasn't done yet. The next week, Emily returned to the senior center alone. She talked to people who knew Margaret, volunteers, retirees, friends Margaret had made over the years. Each one had a story. "She brought me soup when I lost my husband. She helped fix my porch without asking for a dime. She prayed with me when my son went to rehab. She sits with me during bingo because my eyesight is bad." Emily listened to every word, feeling her heart swell with pride and shame in equal measure. All these years, she had been chasing images of wealth and status, while her mother had been quietly building a life full of love, service, and kindness. It hit her like a wave. Her mother wasn't someone to hide. Her mother was someone to aspire to. That night, Emily returned home and hugged Margaret with a fierceness that startled them both. "What is it, sweetheart?" Margaret asked. Emily smiled through her tears. "I hope someday I can be even half the woman you are." Margaret cupped her face lovingly. "You already are. You just couldn't see it before." Emily pressed her hands over her mother's. "I see everything now. I promise I do." But something else was coming, something Margaret could never have prepared her for. A truth not about the past sacrifices or the silent pain, but about why Emily abandoned her that night. A truth buried beneath guilt, lies, manipulation, and a secret Margaret never knew existed. A secret that would soon surface, and when it did, it would change everything. The secret didn't reveal itself in a dramatic way. It didn't come through a confrontation or a letter or a forgotten voicemail. It came quietly, almost casually, like truths often do when they've been waiting too long to surface. It started when Emily decided to donate some of her old clothes. She grabbed a box from the top shelf of her closet, one she hadn't opened in years. Inside were folded sweaters, unused notebooks, and at the bottom, a small velvet pouch she didn't recognize. She opened it and found a silver bracelet. Her breath caught. It was the bracelet Derek's mother gave her at the bridal shower, the one she claimed was a family heirloom, and far too elegant for a simple wedding like yours once was. Emily had worn it hesitantly, feeling unworthy of it. She knew exactly what wearing it meant: expectations, duty, an image to maintain. But that wasn't what made her freeze. Attached to the clasp was a tiny folded note she had never seen before. Her stomach tightened as she opened it. Inside, written in Patricia's handwriting, were the words that had shaped everything. "You need to keep your distance from your mother. She will embarrass you in front of Derek's family. We don't need her ruining this wedding. Handle it." Emily felt the blood drain from her face. Her knees weakened, and she sat on the floor, staring at the note as if it were a ghost from a life she wished she could forget. She read it again and again, her vision blurring. "Handle it. Idee." Those words had pierced her on the day of the wedding, filling her with fear, not of her mother, but of disappointing the world she was desperate to belong to. Patricia's voice had echoed in her head, manipulating every insecurity she'd ever had. "You don't want them to see where you come from, do you? You only get one chance to make the right impression. They'll judge you based on her." Emily squeezed her eyes shut. She remembered feeling trapped, torn between love and shame, terrified of losing the life Derek promised her. She remembered Patricia whispering to her minutes before the ceremony, "Do what's necessary." Emily had believed her. She had done what she thought would protect her future, but at what cost? Her throat tightened. "Oh my God! What did I do?" She clutched the note against her chest, sobbing. All this time she had believed she acted out of her own selfishness, and part of that was true. But the deeper truth was that she had been manipulated, pressured, shaped by someone who saw Margaret's humility as a flaw, someone who used Emily's insecurities as leverage. But it didn't erase the fact that she had gone along with it. After hours of crying, she stood and wiped her face. Her hands shook as she held the note. She needed to tell her mother. She needed to reveal everything. She needed to face the one person she had hurt worst of all. When Margaret walked through the door that evening, grocery bags in her hands, she found Emily sitting at the kitchen table with red eyes and trembling shoulders. "Sweetheart?" Margaret said softly, setting the bags down. "What happened?" Emily held out the note with shaking fingers. "Mom, I found this." Margaret took the note, confusion knitting her eyebrows. As she read, her expression changed, not to anger, not to betrayal, but to a soft, deep sadness. "Oh, Emily," she whispered. Emily broke down immediately. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I let her get inside my head. I let her decide who you were allowed to be. I let her convince me that you weren't good enough for my new life." Margaret sat beside her slowly. "Come here." Emily collapsed into her arms. "She made me think you were going to embarrass me. She made me believe that you were holding me back. And I believed her. I did something unforgivable because I didn't want to lose them." Margaret held her tighter, stroking her hair. "You didn't lose them, sweetheart. They never truly belonged to you." Emily sobbed harder. "You're the one I should have protected. You're the one I should have been proud to show to the world." Margaret's voice trembled as she spoke. "I never wanted you to choose between me and your dreams. But I did," Emily said through her tears. "And I chose wrong." Margaret kissed the top of her head gently. "You were scared. They used your fears. They made you feel small." Emily nodded painfully. "But I still made the choice. I still left you on that road." Margaret pulled back to look at her. "And you came back. That means more to me than anything." Emily searched her mother's eyes. "How are you not angry with me?" "I was hurt," Margaret whispered, "deeply. But anger would only keep us apart, and I don't want to lose you again." Emily covered her mouth, overwhelmed. "Mom, I don't deserve you." Margaret shook her head. "You deserve grace. You deserve forgiveness. You deserve second chances, just like I did when I was young." Emily blinked. "You?" Margaret nodded. "I made mistakes too, sweetheart. Different ones, maybe, but mistakes all the same. Life teaches us slowly, sometimes painfully." Emily leaned into her. "I want to spend the rest of my life making this right." Margaret smiled gently. "Then start by staying close." They held each other as the room quieted around them. The note lay on the table, a reminder of the cruelty that sparked everything, but also of the courage it took for Emily to finally face the truth. After a long silence, Emily whispered, "I want people to know who you really are. Not the woman they imagined, the woman who worked 3 jobs, the woman who held our family together, the woman who never once spoke badly about me." Margaret looked down shyly. "I didn't do anything special." "Yes," Emily said firmly, "you did. You loved. That's the most extraordinary thing anyone can do." Margaret felt tears rise. "Thank you, sweetheart." Emily placed her hand over her mother's. "I'm not going anywhere. Not ever again." They sat together for a long time that night, letting truth settle into every corner of the room. But the journey still wasn't over. There was still one thing Emily had to do. One last confrontation. One final step toward closure. She needed to face Patricia. And she needed to say, out loud, everything she had never dared to say before. Emily didn't sleep much that night. She kept turning Patricia's note over in her hands, reading the sharp letters again and again until they blurred. It wasn't just anger she felt, it was clarity. A painful, essential clarity that showed her exactly how deeply she had let someone else shape her life. By the time the sun rose, she knew what she had to do. She dressed quietly, moving through the house while her mother still slept. Before leaving, she stepped into Margaret's room. Her mother lay peacefully under a quilt she'd stitched years ago. Emily leaned down and kissed her forehead. "I'll be back soon," she whispered. "I promise." Then she drove. The closer she got to Oakridge, the tighter her chest felt. The town used to represent her idea of success. Nice houses, clean yards, shiny cars. Now it felt cold, artificial, hollow. She pulled into Patricia's driveway and turned off the engine. Her hands shook, but she didn't let herself hesitate. She walked up the steps and knocked. Patricia opened the door, eyebrows lifting in surprise. "Emily, what are you doing here?" Emily held up the note. "We need to talk." Patricia's smile thinned. "I don't know what that is." "You wrote it," Emily said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "And your words destroyed my relationship with my mother." Patricia folded her arms. "Oh, please, you're exaggerating. I gave you advice so you wouldn't embarrass yourself. Your mother is a sweet woman, but she doesn't fit." Emily felt heat rise in her chest. "Doesn't fit what, Patricia? Your idea of class? Of image? Of worth?" "I was protecting you," Patricia said coolly. "No," Emily said firmly. "You were controlling me, manipulating me, feeding every insecurity you saw so I would depend on your approval." Patricia scoffed. "You misunderstood." "No," Emily cut in. "I understood perfectly. You thought my mother wasn't good enough. You thought I wasn't good enough, and you made sure I believed it too." Patricia's face tensed. "You're upset. You should calm down." Those words, "calm down," were the final spark. Emily stepped closer, voice trembling but strong. "Do you know what your advice made me do? I left my mother on the side of a road, alone, tied to a post, on my wedding day." Patricia blinked, shock flickering for a moment before she swallowed it. "That was unfortunate, but you were under pressure." Emily's nails dug into her palms. "She could have died." "But she didn't," Patricia snapped. "And you got the wedding you wanted." Emily stared at her, horrified. "No, I got the wedding you wanted, the life you wanted, and I lost myself, and almost lost my mother, trying to fit into your world." Patricia straightened. "Well, maybe you should have been stronger. People can only push you if you let them." Emily let out a harsh breath. "You're right. I let you push me, but not anymore." Patricia's expression tightened. "So what now? You're running back to your old life? To that tiny house and that grocery store? You're throwing everything away?" Emily lifted her chin. "I'm choosing everything I should have chosen in the first place." She placed the note on Patricia's table. "This belongs to you, not me." Patricia's jaw clenched. "You're making a mistake." "No," Emily said softly. "I made a mistake when I believed you." With that, she turned and walked out, closing the door behind her. She didn't look back. The drive home felt different, lighter, though her heart was still pounding. She had confronted Patricia, but now came the harder part, rebuilding what Patricia had helped destroy. When she returned home, Margaret was in the backyard watering marigolds. Emily stepped out of the car slowly, letting her mother see her approach. "How did it go?" Margaret asked gently. Emily walked right up to her and wrapped her arms around her waist, burying her face in her mother's shoulder. "It's done," she whispered. "I told her everything, and I'm done letting her control my life." Margaret stroked her hair. "I'm proud of you." Emily exhaled shakily. "Mom, I feel like I'm finally breathing again." They held each other for a moment, surrounded by the quiet hum of the afternoon and the earthy smell of fresh soil. Then Margaret stepped back and touched Emily's cheek. "You're becoming the woman I always knew you were," she said softly. Emily wiped her tears. "I want to be better. For you. For myself." And Margaret smiled. A smile that reached the corners of her eyes and said more than words ever could. In the days that followed, Emily noticed something changing inside her. The guilt didn't disappear entirely, but it softened. It became something she could carry without sinking. And in its place came gratitude. Deep, overwhelming gratitude for the second chance she had been given. Soon after, Emily found work assisting a local nonprofit that helped elderly residents with errands and companionship. She didn't choose the job because she felt she owed something. She chose it because it felt right, because helping people who reminded her of her mother made her feel connected to something bigger, something meaningful. Margaret couldn't have been prouder. "You have such a good heart," she told her one evening. Emily looked at her mother, eyes warm. "I learned from the best." They shared meals, conversations, quiet evenings watching the sunset from the porch. Life wasn't perfect, but it was honest, real, and for the first time in a long time, Emily felt at peace. One afternoon, while dusting the shelves, Emily found the ceramic bird again. She held it gently, smiling at the fixed wing. "Mom," she called out, "do you think it would be all right if we put this in the living room instead?" Margaret walked in, smiling. "Of course, it belongs wherever it makes you happy." Emily placed the bird on a central shelf, where the sunlight could hit it each morning. It looked brighter somehow, whole again, just like them. But the story wasn't finished yet. There was still the matter of the truth Emily had avoided for years. Not just the truth about Patricia or the wedding night, but about herself. The truth that healing wasn't only about apologizing, it was about changing, choosing differently, loving differently, living differently. And soon, Emily would face one more moment that would test everything she had rebuilt, a moment that would decide whether she would carry the past forever, or finally let it go. The moment arrived unexpectedly. On a quiet Saturday afternoon, Emily and Margaret had just finished reorganizing the kitchen cabinets, an ordinary task, but one that filled Emily with a warm sense of belonging she hadn't felt in years. Margaret stepped outside to check the mail while Emily swept the floor. When Margaret returned, she held a small envelope with no return address. "This came for you," she said, handing it to Emily. Emily frowned. "For me." She opened it carefully. Inside was a card with simple lettering. "Congratulations on signing your divorce papers. I hope you've learned your lesson. P." Emily felt her chest tighten. It was Patricia, still trying to control her, still trying to keep her small. She stared at the note, feeling the old weight of shame creep up her spine. But then she felt a warm hand on her back. Margaret leaned over her shoulder. "What does it say, sweetheart?" Emily hesitated, then handed her the note. Margaret read it quietly, her expression softening into something that wasn't anger, just sadness. Some people hurt others because they don't know how to be kind. Emily swallowed hard. "I don't want her to have power over me anymore." "You're already taking that power back," Margaret said gently. "Just look at your life now." Emily looked around the kitchen, the sunlight on the counter, the soft clink of the wind chime outside, the ceramic bird watching from the shelf, her mother's gentle presence beside her. Margaret was right. This was her life now, a life built on truth, love, and choice, not fear. Emily took the note, folded it once, and without hesitation dropped it into the trash. Margaret smiled. "Good." Emily exhaled, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. "Mom, I'm done letting people like her shape me. I'm done trying to fit into places I don't belong. I want to be someone you're proud of." Margaret took her daughter's hands. "I've always been proud of you." Emily's eyes watered. "Even after everything?" "Especially after everything," Margaret whispered. "You changed. You grew. That takes courage." Emily nodded slowly, letting those words settle into her heart. She didn't deserve forgiveness easily, but she was learning how to live in a way that honored it. In the weeks that followed, Emily continued building a life rooted in purpose. She became a regular volunteer at the nonprofit, visiting seniors who needed company. She helped Mrs. Abernathy with yard work. She delivered groceries to a man recovering from surgery. She drove an elderly couple to their doctor's appointments. Each act felt like stitching together a part of herself she had lost, and Margaret watched her daughter bloom with a quiet joy that softened the lines in her face. One day, after a long morning of errands, Emily returned home to find Margaret sitting on the porch with a photo album open on her lap. "Come sit with me," Margaret said. Emily settled beside her, curious. Margaret pointed to a picture of Emily at age 7, missing 2 front teeth, holding up a spelling test with a gold star on it. "You were so proud that day," Margaret said with a smile. Emily laughed softly. "I remember. You made cookies to celebrate." "I made cookies because you were happy," Margaret replied. That was enough reason. They flipped through more photos: birthday parties, school plays, messy Christmas mornings. Memories Margaret had cherished even when Emily had tried to outgrow them. But then Margaret turned to a blank page. Emily frowned. "What's supposed to go here?" Margaret looked at her gently. "This is for the years we lost. I thought maybe we could fill it together with new memories." Emily blinked, overwhelmed. "Mom, yes, I want that." They spent the afternoon adding recent photos of the garden, of their repaired ceramic bird, of the first dinner Emily cooked for them after coming home. They left room for future ones, and when the album was closed, Emily rested her head on her mother's shoulder. "Thank you for giving me another chance," she whispered. Margaret kissed her forehead. "Thank you for taking it." Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Emily rebuilt her life piece by piece, always with Margaret at the center, and with every step forward, the past loosened its grip. Until one day, Emily found herself driving down a familiar road, the road where she had left her mother years before. She parked her car and walked to the wooden post, now old and splintering. She stood there for a long time, the wind brushing her hair, the sound of distant cars humming through the air. "Mom," she whispered, though Margaret was not beside her, "I'm not that person anymore, I promise you." She touched the post gently, then turned back toward home. Her heart felt light. When she walked into the house, Margaret was in the kitchen, humming as she washed strawberries. Emily hugged her from behind, resting her chin on her mother's shoulder. Margaret smiled. "What's that for?" "For everything," Emily said softly. "For loving me, even when I didn't deserve it." And Margaret covered her daughter's hands with her own. "Everyone deserves love, sweetheart, even when they stumble." Emily held her tighter. "I don't ever want to stumble away from you again." "You won't," Margaret whispered. Later that evening, they sat on the porch watching the sun sink behind the neighborhood. The air was warm, the sky streaked with soft orange and pink. Emily looked at her mother, memorizing her gentle profile, the calm in her expression, the grace she carried in every gesture. "Mom," Emily said quietly. "Yes, sweetheart. I hope someday I can give back to you everything you gave to me." Margaret smiled softly. "You already are." Emily leaned her head on her mother's shoulder as the sky darkened and fireflies began to flicker around the yard. For the first time in years, Emily felt like her life wasn't running away from anything. It was moving towards something beautiful. But their journey still had one final chapter, one last emotional turning point. The day Emily would truly understand her mother's love and the full truth of what had kept them apart for so long. The final chapter of their healing didn't come with drama or confrontation. It came quietly, like most truths in Margaret's life, through an object she had protected for years, always intending to reveal it when the moment was right. It happened on a rainy Thursday afternoon. The sky hung low, gray and heavy, and the sound of raindrops tapping on the windows filled every room with a soft, steady rhythm. Margaret was in the bedroom sorting through old linens while Emily sat at the kitchen table writing thank you notes for the nonprofit. At some point, Margaret walked in holding the walnut box. Emily looked up immediately. "Mom? What's that?" Margaret took a slow breath and sat across from her. "Sweetheart, there's something I haven't told you, something I've been holding on to for a very long time, Emily's eyes softened with concern. "What is it?" Margaret opened the box and removed a folded document. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what she was about to share. "This," she said gently, "is your father's second letter." Emily blinked. "Second? But I thought—" "I showed you the one he addressed to you," Margaret said. "But there was another one. One he gave to me. One he wanted me to read only when I felt you needed it." Emily felt a flutter of worry. "Needed it for what?" Margaret smoothed the edges of the letter, her gaze distant. "For understanding. For healing. For knowing the whole truth about who I was and who I wasn't." Emily's breath caught. "Mom, you're scaring me." Margaret reached across the table and took her daughter's hand. "There's nothing scary here, just honesty. Honesty, I hope, will bring us even closer." Emily nodded, though her heart thudded in her chest. Margaret unfolded the letter and began reading aloud, her voice steady but soft. "My dear Margaret, if you are reading this, it means our Emily is facing something that requires her to know the full truth about you. You have always carried your past quietly, not wanting anyone to judge you or look at you differently, but you deserve to be seen, not just for your kindness, but for your strength." Margaret paused, tears gathering in her eyes. Emily whispered, "Mom, what is this about?" Margaret took another breath and continued reading. "I know how hard your childhood was. I know how much you suffered before you ever met me. The years of instability, the hardship, the loneliness, the fear. But you rose above it all. You became the most generous woman I have ever known. If Emily ever doubts your worth, it is only because she never knew the storms you weathered before she was born." Emily felt a lump form in her throat. "Mom, you never told me about any storms." Margaret folded the letter into her lap, staring down at it with quiet vulnerability. "Because I didn't want you to grow up feeling responsible for my pain. I wanted you to feel safe, to feel rooted, to feel like you came from love, not struggle." Emily's eyes glistened. "What happened, Mom?" Margaret looked up, her gaze soft but clear. "I didn't have a stable home growing up. I moved between relatives. Some treated me kindly, others not so kindly. I worked from a young age, cleaning houses, babysitting, doing whatever I could. I didn't finish school the first time. I went back years later." Emily leaned forward, heart breaking. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't want you to carry my burdens," Margaret said. "Your father understood that. He knew how hard I fought to create a different life for you, to make sure you never felt discarded or forgotten the way I did." Emily covered her mouth, tears falling silently. Margaret reached out and gently wiped one of Emily's tears with her thumb. "Sweetheart, I didn't hide my past because I was ashamed of it. I hid it because I wanted your world to be brighter than mine ever was." Emily shook her head, voice trembling. "Mom, all this time, I thought you had an easy life. I thought you were simple. I thought you didn't understand the world I wanted to be part of. But you survived things I can't even imagine." Margaret smiled softly. "That's why I always understood your pain, even when you didn't understand mine." Emily cried harder. "I treated you like you were less than me. But you're more. You're so much more than I ever realized." Margaret took her daughter's hands. "You're not the only one who needed time to grow. We all grow in different ways." Emily looked down at the second letter, her father's words reaching her in a way nothing else ever had. "Mom, why didn't you show me this sooner?" Margaret brushed a strand of hair from Emily's face. "Because I didn't want the weight of my past to define yours. And because I wanted you to see me with your own eyes, not through a letter, but through love." Emily leaned forward and wrapped her arms around her mother, holding her as tightly as she could. "You're the strongest person I know," Emily whispered. "And I'm so sorry I didn't see you. I'm so sorry I judged you. I'm so sorry I made you feel small when you were carrying mountains." Margaret hugged her back, her voice warm and steady. "You see me now. That's what matters." They stayed like that for a long time, the rain tapping gently on the windows, the house filled with the quiet sound of two hearts healing. When they finally pulled apart, Emily wiped her cheeks and smiled softly. "Mom, thank you for surviving. Thank you for fighting. Thank you for loving me enough to give me a life better than your own." Margaret's eyes shone with emotion. "Thank you for coming home." Emily rested her head on her mother's shoulder as they sat together in the warm kitchen, the small walnut box beside them, no longer a container of secrets, but a symbol of truth finally shared. Outside, the rain eased, and a gentle light began to slip through the clouds. A new beginning, a clean chapter, a bond rebuilt not from perfection, but from truth. In the days that followed, something settled quietly between Margaret and Emily, a peace that neither of them had felt in years. They moved through the house with a new rhythm, one built not on unspoken wounds, but on honesty and understanding. Every conversation felt easier, every shared moment felt fuller, and every look carried a warmth that had been missing for far too long. One morning, Emily woke early to the sound of birds outside the window. She stretched slowly, feeling lighter than she had in years, then made her way into the kitchen. Margaret was already there, humming as she folded dish towels, the sunlight softening her features. Emily leaned against the doorway, watching her for a moment before speaking. "Mom," she said gently, "can we talk about something?" Margaret turned, smiling warmly. "Of course, sweetheart." Emily walked over and sat beside her at the table. "I've been thinking a lot about what comes next." Margaret raised her eyebrows slightly. "Next?" Emily nodded. "Yes, your future. Our future. I don't want to just make things right emotionally. I want to help with your life. I want to support you the way you've supported me." Margaret reached out and touched her hand. "You already do, sweetheart." Emily squeezed her fingers lightly. "I want to do more." Margaret's expression softened. "Tell me what you have in mind." Emily took a breath. "The nonprofit I've been helping, they want to hire me full-time. It's flexible, and I can work from home several days a week. I'd be able to stay here with you." Margaret blinked in surprise. "Emily, are you sure that's what you want?" "Yes," Emily said firmly. "I've never felt more certain about anything. The work is meaningful, and being here with you, it feels right." Margaret felt her throat tighten. "I don't want you to feel obligated to stay." Emily shook her head. "This isn't obligation. This is choice. For the first time in a long time, I'm choosing something that feels honest." Margaret reached out and gently cupped her daughter's cheek. "Then I'm proud of you. Truly proud." Emily smiled, relief washing over her. "I want us to build a life, together." And Margaret nodded, her eyes warm with emotion. "We already are." Later that afternoon, they planted new marigolds in the garden, bright orange, Margaret's favorite. As they worked the soil, Emily felt a sense of purpose she hadn't felt since childhood, back when life seemed simple and full of possibility. "Mom," she said suddenly, "when did you start planting marigolds?" Margaret smiled. "When your father passed. They reminded me of him, warm, steady, strong. I planted them every spring so I'd feel like he was still here." Emily touched one of the petals gently. "They're beautiful. So are you," Margaret said without hesitation. Emily's breath caught. "Mom," Margaret patted her hand. "You've always been beautiful. You just forgot how to see it for a while." Emily felt tears rise but blinked them back, smiling through them. "I love you so much." "I love you too, sweetheart." As the sun dipped lower in the sky, the garden glowed with the soft light of early evening. Emily stood and brushed dirt from her knees. "Mom," she said quietly, "I want to ask you something hard." Margaret straightened, watching her daughter carefully. "Ask anything." "How did you forgive me so easily? After everything?" Margaret sighed softly and leaned on her gardening trowel. "Because forgiveness isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about choosing not to let pain define your future. I didn't want to carry bitterness in my heart. Bitterness is heavy. Love is lighter." Emily swallowed, moved by the simplicity of her mother's wisdom. "I'm learning that." Margaret smiled. "You're doing beautifully." That evening they made dinner together and ate on the porch, enjoying the warm breeze. Afterward, Emily washed the dishes while Margaret dried them, both humming quietly to an old song playing on the radio. When the kitchen was clean, Emily walked into the living room and noticed the photo album still open on the table. She sat down and began flipping through the pages again. Margaret joined her a moment later, sitting close enough for their shoulders to touch. "Mom," Emily said softly, "there's something else I want." Margaret looked at her with gentle curiosity. "What is it?" "I want us to take a picture together. A new one." Emily smiled shyly. "One for the blank page we left." Margaret's face lit up with a smile that reached her eyes. "I'd love that." Emily grabbed her phone, and they stood by the window, where the light was soft and warm. Emily put her arm around her mother's waist, and Margaret leaned her head gently against her daughter's. The timer beeped, the shutter clicked, and just like that, a new memory was captured. When they placed the photo in the album, Emily felt a wave of emotion wash over her. It wasn't guilt, it wasn't grief, it was gratitude. Pure, overwhelming gratitude for the second chance she'd been given. Margaret closed the album gently. "Your father would be so proud of you." Emily rested her hand on the cover. "I hope so. I know so," Margaret said softly. They sat quietly for a long moment, the house wrapped in a peaceful glow as evening settled outside. Then Margaret stood and stretched. "I think I'll make some tea. Want a cup?" "Sure," Emily said with a smile. Margaret walked to the kitchen, humming again. Emily remained on the couch, glancing around the room. The ceramic bird, the marigolds outside the window, the photo album on the table. Her heart felt full, not of regret, but of hope. She had faced the darkest parts of herself, confronted the people who hurt her, rebuilt her relationship with the woman who had loved her unconditionally. She felt whole again, not because the past had disappeared, but because the truth had finally come into the light. And as Margaret set 2 cups of tea on the coffee table and sat beside her, Emily leaned her head gently on her mother's shoulder, exhaling softly. There was still one chapter left to tell, one final moment that would tie everything together and show how far they had come. But for now, this was enough. The seasons turned again, softly shifting the colors around Willow Creek. The marigolds bloomed in bright clusters, the porch creaked in its familiar rhythm, and the neighborhood carried the quiet hum of steady life. Months had passed since Emily found her way home, yet every day still felt like a small miracle, a life rebuilt not through grand gestures, but through ordinary moments filled with intention and love. One crisp morning, Emily woke to the smell of pancakes drifting through the hallway. She smiled, stretching beneath the quilt. Margaret always woke up early, always humming, always moving through the house with a grace that made Emily feel grounded. But today felt different. Emily walked into the kitchen and found her mother standing by the stove, flipping pancakes with a gentle precision. The sunlight washed over her face, highlighting the lines time had etched and the soft warmth in her eyes. "Good morning, sweetheart," Margaret said, smiling. "Morning," Emily replied, tying her hair back. "You're up early." "I had a feeling today would be special," Margaret said simply. Emily poured 2 cups of coffee and sat beside her mother at the table. They ate quietly, sharing looks rather than words, both sensing the meaning in the air even if they hadn't named it yet. After breakfast, Margaret walked to her bedroom and came back holding something wrapped in a soft cloth. She placed it gently on the table between them. "I want you to have this," she said. Emily frowned gently. "What is it?" Margaret unfolded the cloth to reveal the ceramic bird, the one Emily had made as a child, the one with the carefully repaired wing. The sunlight seemed to glow against its glossy surface. "Mom," Emily whispered, "you don't have to give this to me." "It's yours," Margaret said. "It always was. I only kept it safe until you were ready to take it back." Emily picked it up with both hands, as if it were something delicate and holy. "I don't think I could ever deserve this." Margaret shook her head. "You earned it the moment you came home." Emily held the small bird against her chest, eyes glistening. "Thank you." "Otru," Margaret's voice softened. "There's something else I want to show you." She reached into her cardigan pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Old, yellowed at the edges, but carefully kept. Emily felt her breath catch. "Is that—" "Yes," Margaret said. "It's the last letter your father wrote to me, the one he told me to share only when our family was whole again." Emily blinked, overwhelmed. "Mom, are we whole?" Margaret smiled gently. "We are. With trembling fingers, Emily unfolded the letter. Her father's handwriting flowed across the page in familiar loops. My beloved Margaret, if you are reading this, it means the day I always hoped for has arrived, the day our daughter finds her way back to you. I know the world will pull at her, and fear will try to shape her, but she will return to the source of her strength. She will return to you. You are the heart of this family, Margaret. You always were. When she sees you clearly, she will see herself clearly, and she will become the woman we always knew she could be. When that day comes, show her this letter. Tell her that love brought her home. Emily's chin trembled as she held the letter to her chest. He knew, she whispered. He knew this moment would come. Margaret nodded, tears shining in her eyes. Your father had faith in both of us. Emily leaned forward and hugged her mother tightly. I'm so glad I came back. I'm glad too, Margaret whispered. We lost time, but we gained something stronger. They sat like that for a while, wrapped in each other's warmth, letting the moment sink deep into their hearts. Later that afternoon they went for a walk along the old trail behind the neighborhood, the one Emily used to run down as a child. The path was lined with tall grass and wildflowers, and the trees whispered softly with each passing breeze. They reached the small clearing near the creek, where the water shimmered in the sunlight. Margaret took a deep breath. I used to bring you here when life felt too heavy, she said. Your father and I would sit on that log and talk about dreams, about who we hoped you'd become. Emily touched the bark of the fallen log. I wish I had remembered this place sooner. You remembered when it mattered, Margaret said gently. Emily turned to face her mother fully. Mom, I thought my mistakes would define me forever. Margaret smiled, brushing a leaf from her daughter's shoulder. Mistakes don't define us. What we do after them does. Emily breathed in deeply, the crisp air filling her lungs with a sense of renewal. I want to live a life that honors you, honors Dad, honors the love you gave me without ever asking for anything in return. You already are, Margaret said, her voice full of soft pride. They stayed by the creek until the sun began to lower, casting long shadows through the trees. When they finally turned back toward home, Emily felt something settle inside her, a peace she hadn't known since childhood. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sky fade into warm shades of orange, Margaret said quietly, You know, I used to pray that you'd come home, every night, even when I didn't say it out loud. Emily's voice shook. I'm sorry it took me so long. Margaret shook her head gently. The timing was right. You're here now, and that's what matters. Emily rested her head on her mother's shoulder, letting the simple truth hold her. Inside the house, the ceramic bird sat on the mantel, bathed in golden light. Its mended wing was visible, a reminder that broken things, when cared for, can become stronger than before. As the sky darkened and the first stars appeared, Emily whispered, Mom, thank you for not giving up on me. Margaret kissed the top of her head. A mother's love doesn't give up. It waits. It believes. It endures. They held each other close, the quiet night wrapping around them like a warm blanket. And as the world settled into stillness, the story of a mother once abandoned on a lonely road ended where it always belonged. With forgiveness, with truth, with a bond rebuilt stronger than ever, with a daughter finally seeing her mother for who she truly was, and choosing her every day. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to think about the people who raised you. Think about the sacrifices they made quietly, the love they carried without praise, the ways they protected you even when you didn't see it. And if you want more stories like this, stories about family, redemption, and the strength of love, remember to like, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel, because sometimes a single story can bring someone home.